Hey, this is the 7 at 7, and I'm glad you're here again today. We're continuing our conversation about suffering, how to manage that in our own lives, and to help others to do that. And I'm glad you're here for the conversation. Well, welcome back to 7 on 7, and you can see that Dr. Jennifer Fast is with us again today. Yesterday,
Hi.
we talked a little bit about suffering, and today we want to talk about this kind of next step. One of the ways that we both agree is one of the best pathways to kind of begin to work your way out of that, and that is by looking for and seeking to discover meaning in the midst of suffering. And I know that you've thought about this a lot. I'm super anxious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think meaning is such a difficult thing to find in suffering because we're often questioning, why do bad things happen to us? Or why do bad things happen to the people that we love? Or why do things not work out in the way that we want them to? And I think, it's very hard for people to see that through that suffering, there's something at the other end of that, whether that is some kind of lesson that's been learned or a door that's been opened or a person who's come into our life that's really kind of been, impactful, that we didn't have there before. But when you're in when you're in the midst of suffering, you're not thinking about those things. You're thinking about your pain.
Right.
But there's so much meaning that can be had.
This profound verse that we all love out of Romans 8 that says that, all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. We sometimes translate it or think about, interpret it in a very thin light, and that is that there's something good for me that's coming out of this. But I think just broadening it a little bit, that like in the midst of our difficulty, no matter what it is, God is working for good broadly in the world and in the lives of people around us, helps us maybe to see the meaning and the purpose in it a little quicker.
For sure. I gave a lot of thought to this, and I was kind of mentioning some of my thoughts to you earlier on. That question of like, why would God allow bad things to happen to people or to good people, right, who are trying to live their lives the best that they can? And I really think that we're better served by trying to figure out what's God's purpose for us. And that really is where meaning is determining what is our purpose. And so I think if we were focusing on how do we make this world a better place? How do we help people who are scared and who are also suffering to have less of that burden on them? How do we help people feel less lonely, right? That is where we can find a sense of purpose and meaning. We don't have to worry so much about God's agenda through that. And I think maybe that is God's agenda for us, is to kind of rally us to be there for other people and help them get through their suffering.
It's really good. I think that there is some sense that like, what's in it for me? Why is this happening to me? Right? Is a question that often is going to take an eternity to sort of unravel. Like it is that whole business of when we get to heaven, we'll understand those things better. But some of those things just don't reveal themselves in this life. And if we have to have them in order to be satisfied or settled, we're likely to be pretty disappointed.
Yes.
Right. But the other part of that is, I think that if we begin to look to see how is it that God can use this in everybody else's life around me, or how can he use this for good in the people that are brought into my life, those kind of things reveal themselves a lot quicker.
They do.
And
They do.
and that's a sure help.
Yeah. You mentioned Viktor Frankl, whom I love. And I think my book club is going to be reading Viktor Frankl.
Oh, awesome.
But one of the things that Viktor Frankl said was that he wanted to be worthy of suffering. And like that is such a bizarre way to be thinking about that. I mean, it doesn't really connect with how we think about suffering. Like, why would I be worthy of suffering? For those that don't know Viktor Frankl's story, he went through horrific conditions during the Holocaust and saw people he loved die, and the people that he was interned with die, and be murdered, right? So he witnessed like tragedy that most of us can never even imagine. But he said, how can I be worthy of this suffering? And the way that he answered that question was to say to himself, I'm not going to give up on hope. I'm not going to give up on love. I'm not going to give up on courage. I'm not going to give up on being brave. And essentially that all came down to him saying, I'm not going to give up on my humanity. Therefore, I'm not going to give up on humanity in general. And that's how he found his sense of purpose and meaning through all of that suffering.
Yeah, these are really profound ideas. And of course, we all, when we enter into the Passion season every year and we think about the suffering of Christ, we're aware that there is something deep and meaningful about the fact that he's subjected himself to this. He's allowing this to happen. But more than that, that he has stepped into this and that he is allowing this very meaningful thing to happen through suffering in his life. So this idea of being worthy of suffering, like we understand that because we understand that only Christ was worthy to suffer in the way he did. We see the nobility in it. And what was true for him is true in a different kind of way, but certainly also a true way in our lives.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we're talking about, this idea of meaning and suffering kind of at a high level. But if we kind of bring it down to how does this look in the day to day, one of the questions that folks can ask themselves is, well, why? Like, what can I actually do? Right. And it doesn't have to be this big lofty thing, right? You don't have to go and start a nonprofit. You
Right.
you don't have to write a book unless you want to. But just the question of why. So maybe the why is, you know what? I'm going to make sure that my dog goes out for a walk every day because I care about my dog. And my dog being able to go out and have a walk and get some exercise matters. And then that means I get a little bit of exercise. I get a little bit of sunshine. Or maybe it is that I have grandchildren who I love. And even though I'm struggling right now, I find joy in spending time with them. That could be my why. And sometimes it's as simple as, I'm just, like, I'm just going to get out of bed because that's the thing that I have to do, right? Every day I got to get up out of bed, and that's going to be the why for today. I got up out of bed because that's what life looks like.
Right.
A daily life looks
Well, we
like.
talked before, and maybe I mentioned it Sunday in the sermon, that there's this tendency in the midst of suffering to become very internally focused
Yes.
and kind of self-absorbed. And it's difficult. You get into this sort of cycle of taking care of self, and it really makes it worse instead of better.
Yes.
And so I know in my own life, those moments where I've suffered the deepest, often it's when I step out and do something to take care of someone else or my dog or a friend, or I was aware of what an incredible blessing our oldest son was in the midst of the loss of our daughter, because it gave us someone to love and to care for and to invest in, right? That was something outside of ourselves.
Yes.
And there was something that was really a great gift in that and other things along the way too.
Yeah. Yeah. He still needed you.
Yeah, that's right. We're still needed, right? And so, in the midst of suffering, like there is value in seeking to find meaning and to feel like God's continuing to use you and to accomplish things that are good in spite of the pain that you're feeling. And I just know that those kind of moments where we have the chance to help somebody else lifts our spirit.
It does.
And sometimes it just might mean intentionally you get up and say, I'm going to go help somebody else and get my eyes off of myself for a little bit. And I think you'll be shocked about the way that blesses and helps in the midst of suffering.
Absolutely. And just, if you get to the end of your day and you say, what did I do today? And you can say, you know what? I took my dog for a walk. I spent time with my grandchildren. I called a friend who I know is struggling. I, volunteered at the church or wherever. If you can answer that question with, I did something for somebody else, you've actually done something for yourself as well. And you do get that positive kind of reinforcement.
Yeah. We talked about this, and I've visited with the church about it a lot, but I want to bring up one more time because it all connects, is this notion that when we come into suffering, we have a ministry of suffering. And that is that we're just aware that God is using our pain as an opportunity for the people around us to show compassion and to be more human and to demonstrate they're more kind and to be more selfless. And like nobody would want that ministry. But it is true that when we step into that, we have the opportunity to allow this to be beneficial to the people around us in the same way that we probably grew as humans and became more loving and compassionate when somebody else was hurting in our life. And so it adds this meaning business.
Yeah. I think, most people don't realize that therapists, counselors, mental health professionals in particular, are in that ministry of pain because many of us, if not most of us, have our own experience of pain. And that pain allows us to empathize with others, and it allows us to serve others and help them through their own struggles. So that when you brought that term up, that ministry of pain, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense to me. How do, like in terms of the work that I do.
Yeah, one of the most redemptive things about after our daughter passed away was the first time we met a couple who had lost their child. And now suddenly we're able to share a little of what we've known, and it's helpful to them, and then it suddenly was helpful to us. And of course, Paul talks about this whole thing that we endure things and that God uses the same comfort that we found to comfort other people. And yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
And you let that couple know that they're not alone.
Yeah, right.
They're not. You're
Somebody's
not.
been there before, and there were people that stepped into our life just like that at the first stages for us too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is good in God in the midst of our suffering, and this has been a nice conversation about this. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the grief cycle, and we'll look forward to talking to you then.